I like Andy Weir. So when I saw how good the film adaptation of Project Hail Mary looked, I knew I was going to have to do a build. The problem is that I had no idea what to build, until I saw this video, where Adam Savage takes a tour of the fully practical cockpit set they made for the movie. It's a fantastic video, and it honestly made me enjoy the movie even more seeing the dedication that went into the set design. After watching it, I knew I had to do a replica of the cockpit.
W, X, Y, Z, Plan Z, here it is!
I decided I was going to do a cockpit cutaway. The cockpit of the Hail Mary is basically just a large cylinder, so I decided to do a cylindrical shell with a cutaway down the side. The shell would be capped on either end with large circular windows. Inside the shell would be a separate frame to support the structure and hold all the avionics. The avionics themselves would be illuminated by a set of LED string lights that are embedded into the frame. All of this would be wired into a display stand that houses a switch and all the electronics. I had a concept, so I collected a ton of reference photos and modeled everything out in Blender, starting with the frame and display stand, then the avionics, the cockpit chairs, and a few other internals. I started with the shell and windows, which I sanded, then primed, and then gave everything a coat of nice metallic silver. While the shell dried, I started work on the avionics panels. The details were good, but they did need a little bit of prep work and cleanup before they were ready to be painted. In total, I needed 60 panels to fill the cockpit, with the double-wide panels counting as 2. The sharp-eyed will notice that I do not have 60 panels. I only discovered this later when I ran out of panels and had to make more. I gave the panels a matte gray coat and then began painting the details. And by details, I mean hundreds and hundreds of tiny white buttons. Luckily, I was able to break the monotony by also getting to paint some black buttons sometimes. But things really got interesting when I got to break out the yellow and red paint. I set the panels aside to dry and got to work on the screens. I collected a bunch of screenshots of flight displays, instrument panels, and docking videos from the International Space Station. I had them printed at FedEx because my $45 Walmart printer couldn't be bothered to turn on. I cut out the images and glued them to the backs of the panels. Before assembling the shell, I test fit all the pieces just to make sure I didn't screw anything up. Everything looked good, so I scored the frame pieces and started gluing them in. The shell kept separating from the frame, so I had to tape them as I went. For the display stand, I started by lobotomizing it with a 1/4-inch drill bit, and then spent the next 20 minutes fixing my mistake. Pro tip, you can use baking soda to make superglue cure faster. Before beginning the wiring, I test fit the shell to the display stand just to make sure everything fit right. Then I very carefully drilled some holes for the wires. I designed the skeletal frame with these little notches to hold the flexible LEDs in place. And to my surprise, they actually worked really well. Now, I want to preempt this next part by saying that I'm not an electrical engineer, so if you see something I did wrong, just leave a comment below and I will try to do better next time. That being said, the light did turn on the first time I plugged it in, so maybe I don't need your help after all. I put in a few of the panels to see what it would look like, and the result was, well, okay. The thin light strips lit the screens unevenly and just made them look off. I needed to find a way to diffuse the light without completely redoing all of the avionics panels. After giving it some thought, I decided to paint one of the back walls white to see how it increased the diffusion. And sure enough, there was a noticeable difference in the brightness. So I removed all the lights, painted all the back walls white, and then started putting the avionics panels in. This also felt like a good time to install the window frames. All the windows for the model were cut from sheets of 1mm acrylic, which took a long time and made a giant mess. I wanted to make sure the scene would have ample ambient lighting, so I made these simple ceiling panels. In the movie version, there's more avionics panels and breakers on the ceiling, but I figured since you won't see that area much on the model anyway, this would be a good place to put lights. With all the electronics installed on the model, I figured it was time for a test run. This was really a make or break moment for me. I had put a lot of work into the model up to this point and was nervous that it wasn't going to look the way I wanted. But I plugged it in, flipped the switch, and it was by no means perfect, but I'm really happy with it. The only notable flaw I could really see was the gaps between panels letting light through. I tried to think about ways to solve this, and in the end decided to go with a mixture of PVA glue and paint, which actually worked. Now that I knew the lighting looked okay, it was time to feed everything into the base, which was a bit like forcing half-cooked spaghetti into a drinking straw. The difficulty was exacerbated by the arrival of my cat. But eventually I did get everything pretty much situated. I say pretty much because I didn't account for the fact that the lights were thicker than the wires and thus wouldn't quite fit in the channel I created. I decided to save that problem for later and move on with the interior. The cockpit seats of the Hail Mary move along these channels in the floor. For some reason, I particularly like this center floor panel, especially after I added these blue space station style handrails. For the inward facing wall, I used these fabric wrapped wall panels, which I initially intended to use on the outward facing, but I just didn't really like the look of them against the avionics. While I was finishing up the interior, I got to enjoy the live stream of the Artemis II launch, which felt topical. I wired everything up and added a faceplate with a toggle switch. From the very beginning, I knew I wanted to use one of these Avionics style toggle switches with the big red cover. Then I nervously glued the model to the frame, which just felt very final. If I wanted to go back, I'd either damage the model, the frame, or both. I wanted the exterior to look the part as well, so I created some decals and handrails. All of these features are based on reference images from the movie and pictures of the International Space Station. They're certainly not screen accurate, but they look the part. With the interior nearly complete, I figured it was time to add the end caps. I added these outer rings to help keep the cylinder from pulling itself apart over time. It was now time to move on to our heroes.
RoboCop and the Ultra Police, the only cops with rapid repeat cap firing.
I started with my Grace figure, which for legal reasons only kind of looks like Ryan Gosling, and began painting. At this point, I still wasn't exactly sure how I wanted to lay out the scene, but I knew that I wanted to have Grace floating just because I think it would look really cool. If you've seen the movie, you'll know that one of Grace's most notable features are his glasses, which he wears pretty much every way except correctly. So I made him a pair out of a single strand of wire. To make Rocky, I actually carved some pieces out of foam core, sealed them with glue, and then painted them. Once dry, I glued the pieces together into everyone's favorite extraterrestrial pentapod, taking special care to make sure everything was out of focus the entire time. For Rocky's ball, I originally intended to use this triangular sphere thingy and use pieces of thin plastic as the windows. But it seemed like a lot of work to get something that I don't think was going to look the way I wanted. So I decided to bust out my 3D pen and see if I could improve Rocky's ball by hand. I used the original sphere as a guide and snipped out the smaller triangles, then replaced those triangles with larger sections from the pen. Basically, I created a ball of Theseus where the finished product contained almost none of the original material. Once I was done playing with Theseus's balls, I had to figure out how to put windows in them. That's when I got to do one of those things that shouldn't work but totally did. It turns out the UV resin I had on hand was viscous enough that if you dip a frame in it, it has enough surface tension to bridge the whole window. So I carefully dipped the ball in one window at a time and then cured the resin with my UV light. I repeated the process for every frame on both hemispheres until I had a full ball. This is me realizing that I worked really hard on this detailed Rocky figure only for it to be obscured almost entirely by the ball. I guess I could have used a piece of wadded up clay or something, but there's something satisfying about knowing that he's really in there. After giving it some thought, I decided to go with a scene where Grace and Rocky were both looking out of the window. Grace would be floating in 0G with his hand on another one of these blue rails, and Rocky's ball would be situated on a cockpit chair, duct taped down so he wouldn't float away. I made the strips of duct tape by painting some painter's tape and cutting it into thin strips. I finished the cockpit chairs, but I forgot to record any of it, so sorry. With the figures and the chairs added, I could finally consider the model complete. Only one thing left to do. If you enjoyed this video, please consider subscribing so you can see what I build next. Thanks for watching.